Well, I've got a surprise for you guys today. I'm doing a PlayStation Vita review. The newest Fate Stay Night Muso Warriors game has come out, and I did not receive a review code for the Nintendo Switch version, but I did receive a review code for the Vita version. Unfortunately, this means this won't be a multi-platform review for both the Switch and Vita audiences, but hey, I'll take what I can get. Being a direct sequel to Fate Extella, here is my review of Fate Extella Link for the PlayStation Vita and PlayStation TV. First of all, this is a direct sequel to Fate Extella, not an enhanced version of Fate Extella. As such, you'll want to be playing Fate Extella before this game, but I'll keep those spoilers out of this review. The story of Link takes place not long after the end of Extella, where the Master, or the protagonist, is wandering around Seraph and is ambushed by a lot of attack programs. And when he tries to summon one of his servants to help him in the battle, he summons a brand new servant he's never seen before. This new Saber-class servant protects the Master and brings news of a new war headed their way. Now, most of what I have to say about the story is about the same as the original game. It's a pretty interesting story on its own, especially if you know the characters, but even if you don't, there are little tidbits of information explaining who everyone is, or at least who all of the servants are based on as far as historical figures go. But just like in the original game, Nero and Tamamo have a habit of throwing all of their dating sim, welcome home my husband, let's go my husband talk into a lot of serious conversations, which really kind of derails the mood of those conversations. I'm not saying this ruins the game and it isn't a little funny whenever this happens, but just like in the original game, it happens a little too much. When it comes to gameplay, Fate Extella Link is a Muso Warriors action game with some RPG elements thrown into the mix. As you go through the game, you're going to be wandering around 3D arenas, fighting through hordes of enemies, and leveling up after missions to gain new skills and new customization. Now, just to make this clear before I go on, Fate Extella Link is a sequel, not an enhanced edition of Fate Extella. As such, the original game is not included here. But this game does retain all 16 playable characters and all the previous stages from the original game on top of a lot of new ones. Link added 11 new playable characters on top of the original 16, almost doubling the roster of playable characters at your disposal. So imagine this like a fighting game. Keep the roster, add to the roster, new story. Now when it comes to game modes, you've only got a few things to choose from. You've got story mode where you can go through the story campaign, extra battle where you can go through side missions that are unlocked as you go through the story campaign, and then you've got gallery and options for viewing all the character models and artwork and changing settings. Now if you compare this to the original, it means the free battle mode from the original is no longer here. But the side missions are not locked to certain characters. You can do any side mission with any unlocked character, so it's kind of like a free battle-ish sort of thing. Just like with the original, your main task here is to go through story mode, which is considerably different than before. The original had different story arcs for the different main characters. In this game, you have a single story mode with branching paths, and you can use any playable characters that you unlock as you go through that story mode. You've also got 3 different ending paths that you can go on, the third of which, the true ending, is only unlocked once you do the other 2. Now there are quite a few enhancements to story mode this time around. Instead of a menu as your little hub or base of operations, you got an actual 3D hub world that you can walk around so you can have your servant follow you around and talk to the others. Of course, the customization, talking, and bonding features aren't really that different here. The biggest difference is the fact that you have a lot of different characters that you can talk and bond with instead of just 1 or 2. Instead, most of the new features don't start showing up until you actually go into combat, which actually does have a lot of new stuff in it. You do have a typical Muso formula of wandering around areas, taking over areas, following mission objectives, and stringing together combos of light and heavy attacks to fight through hordes of enemies. But you've got some new attacks in your arsenal now. Instead of just doing combos with the light and heavy attack buttons, which you can still do, you can equip up to 4 different high-powered skills that you can activate with a trigger button and a face button that will recharge after it's used. These recharge quickly and make battles feel very, very different. Not just the fact that these are very flashy, powerful moves, but they can link and chain into launch attacks and clashes. Whenever one of your skills launches an enemy into the air, you can start mashing the square button and you and every other ally in the area will start pummeling them for huge amounts of damage. And if your skill hits an enemy skill at the same time, you'll enter a sort of beam struggle clash sort of thing, where once again you mash the square button in a fight for who gets the damage in when all is said and done. There's really a lot of extra stuff here that makes things very flashy, and that even goes into the existing Noble Phantasm system and the new Link system. As you fight through enemies, you build up your Link gauge, go into Link mode, and you can unleash a huge super cinematic attack while also building up the Noble Phantasm gauge This means you don't have to go scavenge around the arena for noble phantasm items anymore. It flows really well and gives you all of those flashy, super powerful ultimate attacks. But outside of all of these really cool enhancements that make the game so much better, there are some downsides, the main one being content and length. Fate Extella I remember being a very lengthy 20-hour experience. Fate Extella length is a little bit under half of that. The story campaign for the first, second, and true ending paths only took me around 8 to 9 hours to completely finish. While you can fill up some time with those side missions, not a lot of those side missions have actual dialogue, cutscenes, and story to them. Overall, this game is great in the gameplay enhancements, but really lacks in content. Now let's get into presentation. The game's graphics were made in such a way that there are no jagged edges and everything looks kinda smooth around the character models, but at the same time a lot of the detail and colors are really washed out. Kudos for the developer not having a ton of jagged edges in this version of the game, but it still doesn't look great, especially on the PlayStation TV. And that goes into performance as well. When you're wandering around the hub, the frame rate is nice and smooth, and even when you're wandering around some of the battle arenas, it's nice and smooth. But you get a lot of frame drops and slowdown as soon as you enter combat, especially once things get flashy and you're surrounded by enemies. It's certainly not unplayable, but it doesn't run nearly as well as it should, and in my opinion, not nearly as well as the original game on the Vita. Now in conclusion, Fate Extella Link offers a huge amount of characters and vastly improved gameplay over the original release. Now on the downside, the story is much shorter this time around, and we've got some issues with the presentation and performance. But if you can deal with some slowdown and how the game looks, this is a fun Musou games for Fate fans of all varieties. And if you can't deal with it, it might be worth checking into the other versions of the game, because this is definitely still worth playing. Reviews to Go rates Fate Extella Link for the PlayStation Vita and PlayStation TV a 6.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below or head to the website at reviewstogo.com.